Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Early Music Podcast. My name is Darina Ablogina, and this season holds something truly extraordinary as we dive into the heart of the Early Music Summit. How can we embrace the bigger picture of research, education, performance, and creation? How will we redefine our field in a more open, inclusive, and balanced world? Join us in shaping the future of the early music scene with the Early Music Summit. And today my guest is...
My name is Rebekah Ahrendt. I'm Associate Professor of Musicology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. My background is in both musicology and performance. So I studied viola da gamba at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague many years ago now, and then did a PhD in musicology at UC Berkeley with a dissertation on late 17th century operatic migrations and relating to the French refugees, the Huguenot refugees. I have been involved in, I guess, the world of early music for a very long time as both a performer and an audience member and a musicologist. I get around.
You are joining this program, EarlyMuse, and could you provide an overview of COST and its mission, and how it relates to the world of musicology and the early music field?
Great. So COST actions. So COST is the Cooperation in European Science and Technology. And it is an organization that is funded largely by the European Commission, which sets out to support the most innovative new ideas in the world of science and technology. So my dear colleague Philippe van Driex from Tours and Liège had the idea that, well, we really should do something about the world of early music. And I said, yes, we should, because we are concerned. And our concerns mostly have to do with the disconnection that we see in the field, particularly the disconnection between studies of musicology, studies of the history of music, and then what's happening in the performing field, what's happening currently also with the creative and cultural industries. How can we really unite all the different areas of this fascinating musical scene and help take it into the future? So back in, I guess that was in in the fall of 22, we applied together with a group of other colleagues for a COST action. So the COST actions are on a dedicated topic, in our case, a new ecosystem of early music studies. And the COST organization provides money primarily for networking. So it's our task throughout the 4 years of the action to try and build as wide a network as possible in order to tackle the goals of the action, which are to chart a new path that fundamentally links the scene of early music from sources to performances to new formats of publications to the policies that govern the world of culture these days. So we're very excited that so far, since we launched in the fall of 22, we have already had over 200 people sign into our working groups from all over Europe and beyond. So I think we currently have 42 different countries represented in our working groups.
And could you tell more about this program itself? What does it include and how is it developing?
COST is primarily a networking tool. And so what we organize as a COST action are meetings of the working groups, which are usually on a specific topic. So, for example, we had our first meetings in Barcelona and Lisbon a few months ago, in which our different working groups tackled questions like what is the state of sources today? Also, how can we begin to connect the worlds of performance and research in a more fundamental way? So we will be publishing those reports on our website. We also fund what are called short-term scientific missions, and that is where researchers receive funding in order to go visit a different country and a different working environment in order to achieve specific tasks that are related to the goals of the action. So we had 16 different short-term scientific missions that took place in the past few months, including gathering data about early music editions and publications in Europe, which was carried out by a Croatian researcher who went to Barcelona. We also had one in connection with the Orpheus Institute's summer workshop on approaching early music as a 21st century pianist. We had another one that was analyzing data related to early music landscapes at the Center for the Study of Sociology and Aesthetics of Music in Lisbon. So all kinds of different projects that help us to chart the path for how early music studies will develop in the future and answer some of the big questions that we've set forth for our action.
How do you see it? How it's going to develop our future? How does it look like?
I've actually just, last week was the Utrecht Early Music Festival, where there was a lot of reflection on the past and future of early music, in part because the theme this year was revival. And I actually organized the symposium of the festival this year, which was dedicated to the work of Richard Taruskin. Yeah, there's a lot. There are a lot of different directions. And I think that the feeling really now, from what I see on the ground, from what I hear from the people who are involved in our working groups, as well as our wider network of performers and researchers and publishers and all those people, is that we feel like there's a lot of energy that needs some direction, that there's some fragmentation and there are a lot of threats. The threats including, of course, the insecure working conditions, both for academics and for performers. Other threats including the huge changes in the world of recording. Early music is, after all, a field that developed through recordings. How do you even make a record these days? And when you make a record, how do you get people to listen to it? Because there's just that much stuff out there. So all of these questions we're kind of tackling through the work of our working groups. We decided to be quite simple in creating the working groups because there are big questions that are related to each one. So this is why we have one working group on education, one on sources, one on publications, one on performances, and one on policies. Of course, there are intersections amongst the groups too. But for example, this past year, we've had a lot of focus on the education working group because we see this as a really fundamental part of our mission, is to find out what is going on in the world of early music education. So we launched a survey a few months ago to examine the state of early music education in European universities and research centers. We are almost finished with the data collection and have had quite a good response. I think we've had somewhere north of 75 universities and research centers from across Europe who have responded. So we're going to be analyzing that data soon. There will be a report on it. Next year will be an even bigger task for the education group because our intention is to survey the state of early music education in conservatories in Europe, which of course there are many more conservatories than there are universities, so this will be a big challenge. But we figured, if we keep it fairly simple with the topic of each working group, that will allow us to really make an impact in each of those areas. So for sources, the real goal there is to find out how can we stimulate research to discover sources that are under threat or which are not well cataloged, which are not well known. With publications, the big challenges are how can we develop or integrate ourselves into a publication culture when our research doesn't always translate well into the written word? So, for example, artistic research poses huge challenges when it comes to publications because many, if you're in the academic world, many, say, funders or employers do not recognize things like videos as publications. So how can we begin to change that publication culture? How can we also develop a more robust framework for digital publication of research related to early music? With performances, the challenges there are really, how does a performer survive today? And how, too, can we better integrate scholarship into the education and lifestyles of performers? We can talk more about that in a second, because I know your background and this might be of interest to you. With policies, we realize that many of our colleagues in the field of early music studies just have absolutely no idea how cultural policy works. And you can only make cultural policy work for you if you understand how it works. Right. So this is primarily get our colleagues educated on cultural policy mission, as well as raise awareness amongst European policymakers about just how vital and important the world of early music is.
And you mentioned this interaction of researchers and performers. How do you see that from your side?
If we think back a century, maybe a little bit more even, performance and research were really the fundamental drivers of the early music movement. So it was performers who researched and researchers who performed, who gave shape to the field, who began to discover the different ways in which we can approach this music of the past. I'm from California, and in the United States, we do not separate performance and scholarship as strongly as happens in Europe. So you go to a university and you also perform and you also do research and everything's kind of together. One of the fundamental challenges in Europe is that the conservatories and the universities are so far apart. There were people who were able to bridge these gaps fairly effectively in the past, but particularly with the professionalization that we've seen in the conservatories, not to mention the universities, over the past few decades, like since the 1980s when we began having conservatory early music programs. That professionalization has unfortunately led to crystallization of certain kinds of ideas and certain kinds of practices, which led to a certain breakdown of communication between the performers and the scholars. where I teach in Utrecht, we have had a musicology department in Utrecht for a little over 100 years now. No, sorry, we've had a little over 90 years. Anyway, so we've had a musicology department for a very long time. We get approximately 50 bachelor students every year who want to study musicology. Approximately half of them cannot read notes. Which to us,
Why?
those of us, yes, because it is entirely possible these days to study musicology without even having to read notes. At Cornell University in the United States, they've actually abolished the requirement for bachelor students in music to have to know to read notes. Understandable in a way, perhaps, because so much about notation has changed in the past decades. You can do a lot with music. You can compose a lot without knowing how to read notes because we have so many powerful digital tools. So there are massive changes in the world, which both create new opportunities, but also create further challenges to those of us who need to study old scores, who need to study old treatises, have to have the language abilities to do that, who need to learn paleography in order to extract that information about the past that we've always been searching for. In the universities, because of this de-emphasis on score study, on the old school traditions of paleography or whatever, there are actually very few people in the coming generations who can do this kind of work. Which we in EarlyMuse see as a bit of a problem. On the performer's end, performers are now highly professionalized in terms of performance, competitions, training, management skills, business skills. A lot of conservatories have begun weaving business into their models. There's slightly less motivation to be as creative about searching for, finding, reading archival documents and scores than there used to be. Though I must say, everybody's job got so much easier when libraries started just digitizing everything and the stuff ended up on AMSLP. But then we do see people, it's like, oh, hey, this new score turned up on IMSLP. I will just perform it. But they don't realize that it is full of mistakes.
Yeah.
So that critical training in edition making, that ability to look at different sources and realize where they are useful and not, is something that also seems to lack in the conservatories. Where, frankly, performers aren't given a lot of time to do that kind of work because it's not something that they're necessarily getting credit for, and there are a lot of demands on them otherwise, in terms of rehearsals and lessons and practice and everything. Yeah, so that's why, one of the as you said, we're hoping to create a safe space in which such exchanges can take place more readily, in which we can all better understand what are the opportunities as well as the challenges for the field of early music.
Coming back to the EarlyMuse program, how do you see this ideal situation when the program functions in its best shape?
So an ideal situation for me would be that everybody has a steady job, first off. This is really an ideal situation. And I think, I can refer here to, do you know the wonderful book by Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own? Yeah, that you can only truly have freedom of creativity when you have money enough and a room of your own. So I hope that all musicians and scholars out there have money enough and rooms of their own in order to do that really creative thinking that can help to push the world forward. What I would see as a really ideal situation is that we can also work together as equal partners, that there be respect, on the part of scholars for performers and respect on the part of performers for scholars, instead of the sometimes suspicious attitudes that we encounter on both sides, about how musicologists are just failed performers and, performers are uneducated. I hope that we can, find a world where we respect each other for what we are good at and are able to exchange ideas in order to make new things. And also a lot of practices that we're really just now beginning to scratch the surface of. I mean, I'm so excited about all the developments in improvisation, based on historical models. There's so much interesting potential there, so much creative work that's coming out of that. So I'm very excited to see how that goes. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we're so excited to have REMA on board as a partner. So we will be presenting at the REMA Early Music Summit this winter, which we're delighted about because, we are mostly scholars and we're trying to kind of build those bridges to the world of performance and see how we can help each other. We feel we have a lot to learn from REMA, and hopefully we can also teach a little bit too and get noticed for it by policymakers, by politicians, by, those giant cultural heritage NGOs out there who all ought to be listening to what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. It was such a nice and heartwarming talk.
Great. Thanks for having me.
This podcast series is a prelude to the Early Music Summit that will take place at Beaux-Arts and Concertgebouw Bruges from November the 30th to December the 3rd of 2023. Don't miss out on the exciting discussions and discoveries that lie ahead. Thank you for tuning in. Keep exploring the boundless horizons of early music.